Hey, and welcome back to another video. I'm Shaprotham, and in today's video, I'm going to be talking about Purusha and Prakriti. So, what is Purusha and what is Prakriti? Roughly translated, Purusha means soul, and Prakriti means nature. Okay, just like how you hear about, Mother Nature, all our works of nature, that nature. Um, the term Purusha and Prakriti is first encountered in a philosophy called Samkhya philosophy or Samkhya philosophy. And this philosophy was founded by a sage whose name was Kapil. Subsequently, Patanjali, who codified yoga into what's now known as the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, used the same concept of Prakriti and Purusha but added another element. And this other element is called Ishvara Vishesh. Vishesh means exclusive and Ishvara means God. So the Samkhya philosophy was agnostic, atheist, whereas the philosophy and the yoga of Patanjali is not. Every practitioner should be aware to some extent of what Prakriti means and what Purusha means in order to just develop and have more clarity along the way, along their spiritual practice, especially when it comes to yoga. If you're practicing yoga just for health reasons or for physical reasons or, just to feel better, then it shouldn't be that important, this whole concept of Purusha and Prakriti. But obviously, for seekers who are looking for something more deep and to really deepen their spiritual practice, I think it's important to understand what Prakriti and Purusha means. Purusha is soul. Purusha also means soul consciousness. I talked about koshas. I briefly touched upon koshas in one of my previous videos. And in a previous video, which I did on Siddhis, someone left a comment saying that, I've heard about Panchakosh, which are the five koshas, but you're saying seven. Yes, I'm saying seven because, after 15 years of practice, I've read a lot of books and I've done quite a bit of research. And yes, there are seven koshas or layers of being, which I have talked about in that comment. In replying back to that person, I've actually explained why there are seven koshas, what they are, and how they correspond to the chakra system and how they are more or less similar. In discussing Prakriti and Purusha, it's important to know what Prakriti is and what Purusha means. So, what's peculiar about Hindu philosophy is that they believe in a concept called Maya or illusion. They believe that the universe just came into being. They don't ask why. They do ask how, but they never question why. They take it for granted that the universe, just is. So just as in Kapil's Samkhya philosophy, there are two aspects, the male and the female aspect, the Prakriti and Purusha. Similarly, there is matter and soul. The whole object of yoga is to create a separation between matter and soul. And why is this so? Because according to yoga philosophy, it is believed that during creation, matter and soul conjoined with each other, making up what we now see as existence. Okay? And so, yoga proposed a way to achieve liberation by creating a separation between Purusha and Prakriti, soul and matter. First of all, you need to understand what Prakriti means. Because a lot of people are under the misconception that Prakriti or nature is God, like the whole universe, the cosmos, the beautiful trees, and the feelings of getting illuminated, which could just be hormonal activity, especially the one over here, your pineal gland. But I have to tell you that Prakriti means nature, and this includes energy, all the energy, Shakti, all the forces, okay? Matter itself, all the movements within nature, all movements, whether all states of being, static or active, these all fall under Prakriti or nature. So it is incorrect to talk about Prakriti as being the same as soul or even to some extent consciousness. Consciousness acts as a bridge between the soul and Prakriti or matter. So, in order to understand how this comes to be, it's important to understand the Hindu, not really the Hindu. I don't want to use that word because that's incorrect. The yogic way of cosmology, the way Indian philosophers came up with, the cosmological system, or that they have their own theory of creation. The way they did it is that they saw two separate elements. All the organs of action, the five organs of action, the five organs of perception, okay, make up what's called the mind. And the mind they consider to be the 11th organ of perception or of sensation and even of action. Behind the mind is intelligence, and behind intelligence, in association with the mind, are the vrittis, okay, the movements of the mind, the various states of the mind. Behind all of these are the subtle attributes of perception, such as taste, smell, touch, all of these things, sight, And behind these are the elements of nature, which is fire, earth, water, And behind this are the properties of nature, which I spoke about a lot in some of my previous videos. Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. And so if you guys don't know what these three very important properties of nature are, try going back to some of my old videos and take a look. But I'm just going to explain it again for the sake of convenience. So Sattva is represented by the color white, and it represents lightness, purity, okay, goodness. The second is Rajas, and it's represented by the color red, okay, it's of passion, kineticism, it's action, it's vibrancy, it's agitation. And then there is inertia, Tamas, which is represented by the color black. It's rest, absolute solidified rest. And then, in a certain sense, Tamas also represents matter, the density of matter. Rajas represents the intelligence. Rajas represents the life force, and Sattva represents intelligence. And behind the properties of nature, there is Mahat, or the principle of consciousness. And Mahat emanates from and dissolves into what's called Moola Prakriti. Mool means root, Prakriti means nature. So all of the things that I mentioned came from this Mool Prakriti. Now let's talk about Purush. Purush is soul. The soul is unborn. The soul only participates in the process of evolution. It doesn't even take part in it directly. It serves as a support in supporting the activities of Prakriti, the movements, the actions, the evolution of Prakriti. All of these are supported by Purush, or the soul. That being said, Purush is the seed. Prakriti is the womb, the embryo, the egg, Hiranyagarbha. This is not to say that the divine masculine is Shiv and the divine feminine is Shakti, because as far as I know, they talk about the divine feminine as having certain attributes of women, behavioral characteristics, and the same with men. However, how it's been how it has been talked about in Indian philosophy is completely different. So for people out there who you know who are likely to mistake Shiva and Shakti for being the divine masculine and feminine, I'm afraid this is not true, because Shakti is represented as Prakriti and nature, the forces, the energy and matter, and Shiva is the soul. Whereas if you read about divine masculine and feminine, divine masculine is said to have certain masculine attributes, and divine feminine has some feminine attributes which have been given a certain twist of which has been given a certain twist of spirituality and made divine. But I'm not criticizing this. I'm just saying that if there's anybody out there who's going to be saying that divine masculine and feminine is Shiva and Shakti, it's just not correct. Okay, so the soul is unborn. The soul does not evolve. The soul is in no way connected to Prakriti or the movements of nature. It's got nothing to do with it. Okay, it simply serves as a support. How does it serve as a support? It does this first by offering something in the form of consciousness. When you go for a serious operation, they give you something called a general anesthesia. They put you under something called the general anesthesia. And the reason why you don't feel the pain is because you're not conscious. The thing that blocks the soul from being seen the way it is in its pristine essence is because of the movements of nature. It's because of the veiling property of nature. It's because the ego, the mind, and intelligence have become so accustomed to reacting to the impulses generated by nature or the actions taking place in nature. So here's the thing. The soul is always silent. It's quiet. It's tranquil. And hence the attribution to the god Shiv. Whereas nature has power, energy, and Shakti. Therefore, Shakti and Prakriti, nature. And their divine union set to produce illumination, However, this is also another incorrect concept. Their divine union produces a kid by the name of Kartikeya, who is the god of war, the Hindu god of war, and the other is Ganesha, the Hindu god of intelligence. Ganesh, the remover of obstacles. When these two unite, they also become something called Ardhanarishvara, symbolizing the end of all dualities and their absorption into singular unified reality. Okay, Advait. The philosophy is called Advait philosophy, which is non-dualism. Speaking of which, in the same way that there is Prakriti and Purusha, the Advait philosophy or the philosophy of the Upanishads study consciousness, and they talk about consciousness as being completely separate from matter, but by way of association with the ego, it thinks that it's matter. Okay, until through Jnana Yoga or through the yoga of knowledge, the practitioner is able to see the clear difference. And what helps in distinguishing the two is by understanding what is the state of being of consciousness when one is asleep, by studying the state of sleep, the state of being awake, and the state of dreaming, swapna avastha. Avastha means state, and swapna means dream. Eventually, the practitioner, through a certain yogic process, is able to bring all of these states of consciousness, okay, into one union. What this actually means is that through the very knowledge that these states of consciousness are different, and by becoming aware of these states of consciousness, the practitioner closes his or her eyes and tries to focus on a state of consciousness that is beyond these. And if there is a state of consciousness beyond these. And when the yogis did this, because they were inquisitive, they were like scientists, like how scientists experiment with the material universe and with things of the material world. Yogis did this with the internal world and with consciousness. So they found out that there is a fourth state of consciousness, and it's called Turyavastha, which is beyond the other three states of consciousness. And similarly, they encountered what's called soul consciousness. The other peculiar thing when we're talking about Prakriti and Purusha is that we find that Prakriti has these gunas, right, that I talked about, but it also has intelligence. Whether it's cosmic intelligence, universal intelligence, individualized intelligence, human, animal, it's intelligence in general. And there is the mind, of course. And there is also the principle of Mahat, or the principle of consciousness, that is just a bit less material than matter, okay? So when I talked about the seven koshas, what I'm going to tell you further is that existence as we know it, and as has been visualized by these Indian philosophers, is from the denser states to the more subtle. So they were like people, like people had come up with the theory of atoms and electrons and all of these. These philosophers came up with the soul, and these subtle states of existence. So the Annamaya Kosha is the most grossest and the most dense part of existence, the outermost state of existence. And then you go deeper and deeper, and you encounter forces and energies, whether they are physical forces or mental forces, energy in general. And then, of course, you encounter the mental forces and then intelligence. All of these are called, there's a term used to describe these, it's called Sukshma Sharira, or the subtle body. And then you go even more deeper and deeper until you reach the soul, which is beyond consciousness, which is the casual body. So all of these things a practitioner will experience when they really go deep into the study of yoga, if they are interested. The experiences happen anyway, and it doesn't matter whether the person is aware of it or not. But these things have been documented and made into a philosophy as well. So the soul never acts. The soul never takes any kind of action. All action is produced by Prakriti. Okay? And Purusha is the eternal witness. And that's why a lot of people who are into spirituality, or a lot of great spiritual leaders of yoga, talk about developing a witness conscious. The other thing that they talk about is, you're not the mind, you're not the body, you're not the intelligence, and all of these things. This technique is a Vedic technique of meditation. It's come from the Vedanta and also from the Upanishads. And so this is a well-known technique to anybody who's read the Vedas and who've studied the Upanishads, especially the commentary given by Adi Shankaracharya. Of course, now the soul has got nothing to do with nature. What the soul does is that it is simply sitting behind, and there are these forces of nature being presented to itself. The one thing that it does do is it acts as an agent for giving sanction to a particular action. As I said, without consciousness, you won't be able to do a lot of things. You're not going to be able to feel pain or pleasure. You're not going to be able to really move the body without consciousness. And there's a lot to be talked about when we're talking about consciousness, but we're talking about soul, or Purush. So, Purush, in association with consciousness, sees what intelligence and mind is bringing to it. So, if an impure mind or an impure consciousness is presenting a distorted reality of nature, the soul will look at it, as a distorted thing. And when something is wrong, and if it's presented to the soul as being good or right, the soul, being the one that gives sanction, will give sanction. So that's why when you practice yoga, there's so much of emphasis on purifying the mind, the intelligence, the organs of perception. That's why you do the yoga asanas. That's why you make perception really fine and sharp. And that's why you study various kinds of philosophy, to prevent any kind of confusion. And you learn from those who have already experienced enlightenment. So, however, when these organs of perception and when these tools are purified, and when the soul sees the workings of nature for what it is, that's when the soul realizes its true essence. The ego, the mind, and the intelligence are tools. These are the tools that connect nature with the soul. And it's because of this association that we're able to really function as animate beings, because there's got to be an individuality that makes us do something, that gives us a certain color, so to speak. And behind this is consciousness, which is the closest to the soul. Without consciousness, nothing can really happen. And that's why there's this whole talk of raising your consciousness. Raising your consciousness is just it's like cleaning the mirror. If the mirror is dirty, you're not going to be able to see a reflection properly. So if the tools, the properties of nature, if the organs of perception, if consciousness is not pure, the soul is going to be seeing a distorted reality of things. And that soul is said to be under delusion or illusion. So what yoga proposes is to first purify, nature as much as is possible, but more so to connect intelligence and mind and transform ego into something more universal, something closer, by associating all of their workings with the soul rather than with nature. Because Indian philosophy has always believed in reincarnation, and based on this, the belief is that for many thousands of years or lifetimes, you've been associating yourself with nature and what's happening in the external world, rather than turning inward. And it's because of this habit that there is this veiling quality, a veil, so to speak, that's been put over the soul, where it's not able to perceive the fact that it is unlimited and that it is without any kind of restriction. It is the divine Purush, okay? Because of its association and because of the tainted perceptions that it receives from an impurified body, mind, intelligence, it tends to associate itself with the workings of lower nature or a lower Prakriti. Of course, there is a higher Prakriti or divine Shakti. And so what yoga teaches is that yoga teaches you to associate yourself more with this witness consciousness, okay, and less with the movements of nature. So it's asking you to concentrate less on the movements of the waves, less on the depth of the sea, less on the vastness of the ocean. It's asking you to think about what is the ocean, what is the sea in essence. And that's a very difficult thing to do, because you're going into abstract territory at this point. So this is all abstraction at this point, and that always involves some kind of mental and intellectual gymnastics. And that's why those who practice jnana yoga, or the yoga of knowledge, have a particular advantage. However, in practicing any other kind of yoga, nevertheless, the concept of Prakriti and Purusha is all the more important. And Purusha, which is the soul, as I mentioned before, does not evolve. It doesn't have to do any of that, but it does support the evolution of nature. The actions of a yogi, okay, they're said to be detached, or they're said to be the kind that does not produce karma, is because the yogi has learned to associate most of his ego and the workings of consciousness with the soul, which unlike nature does not modify itself, which unlike nature tends to be very silent and quiet. And by this association with the soul, even nature starts to become quiet over time. And that's why when you practice meditation and when you are very close to connecting with this soul consciousness, you notice that there's a physical effect. And the effect is that you become calm. The nerves calm down, the mind becomes silent, there's a certain quietude. And that's because of the existence of the soul. Okay? There is obviously a physiological process, but it's because of the soul that the heartbeat comes down, the mind starts to really become calm and quiet, because there is the soul. But what it is, that's difficult to answer. Can you see it? Can you describe it? That is even more difficult. However, Indian philosophy, the Samkhya philosophy and the yoga philosophy of Patanjali, they are quite certain that there does exist a soul, and if you practice certain techniques, you can encounter and experience the existence of this soul. And of course, associated with this experience of the various benefits, like I explained in my video on spirituality and materialism, can they coexist? And even the mind, which acts as a bridge between matter and spirit, even the mind has a higher state and a lower state. The practitioner, what the practitioner should be concerned with is nature is going to present all kinds of forces and energies to the soul. The soul, as the one that gives sanction, has the right and has the ability to discern, to see whether a certain force or a certain action is good or bad. Because closest to the soul is consciousness. And then there is the intelligence. So the soul can make use of these tools, and it can make better decisions for itself. You know, the soul becomes individuated not only because of ego. The soul becomes individuated also because of the existence of something called a psychic being. And the psychic being is something that gives a personality to the soul. The psychic being is the one that remembers uh, a certain incarnation. And when that incarnation is complete, it takes the essence of all the experiences of that incarnation and transmits it back to the soul from where it came from. And the soul takes over those experiences in the form of the psychic being, you know, and the psychic being at this point has experienced certain things and learned some lessons, and it takes it to the next incarnation. The goal being liberation, to free itself from the cycle of birth and rebirth. And the way is to separate itself from getting entangled with the properties of nature, with the actions of nature, you know. And there's a lot more to talk about in with regards to Prakriti and Purusha. So there's going to be a part two to this, where I'm going to talk to you exactly about, what happens, what are the ramifications, what happens when a practitioner is doing a particular kind of yoga, and what happens to Prakriti, what are the transformations, and how is it that how does the sight of the soul happen, how does a practitioner see the soul, all of these things I'm going to talk to you guys about in part two of Prakriti and Purusha. So that's it from me in this video, and thank you for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.